You have to understand it wasn't about revenge, not at first. It was about a simple, terrifying question. How do you really know someone's heart? Is it in their words when they want something? Or is it in their actions when they think you have nothing left to give? I had to know the answer. So I staged my own demise. I was Margaret Finch, and I built Finch Son from a single fabric bolt into an empire. I knew leverage, I knew assets, I knew when to hold and when to fold. My son David, he only ever learned the part about folding the profits into his accounts, folding the responsibility into a neat little package he could ignore. I saw the way he looked at me, especially after his father passed. He saw legacy, a bank account, a final score. He didn't see a mother, he saw a countdown. So I let the clock tick louder. I started talking about fatigue. I mentioned just in passing a few bad investments. I let a worried tremor creep into my hand when I signed documents. I canceled a few social engagements, pleading a headache. I was painting a masterpiece of decline, stroke by careful stroke. And David, he was such a willing audience. He started making suggestions. Mom, you should slow down. Mom, let me handle that for you. His concern was so thick, so cloying, like cheap syrup. I could feel his hunger. The final test was the will. I sat him down and showed him a new draft. I told him with a fragile voice that I was worried, that I was setting up a trust to manage things, a protective measure just in case my mind started to go. His eyes, they didn't show fear for me, they showed a frantic calculation. He saw the door closing on his inheritance. That's when he made his move. He found this place, Silvercrest Manor. It sounded dignified, it looked adequate, clean but plain, budget-friendly. He presented it to me with such practiced sorrow. It's for the best, Mom. You'll be cared for. You won't have to worry about a thing. He said worry as if it were a burden he was heroically lifting from my shoulders, not as if he were stripping me of my home, my life. I remember the day I signed the admission papers. My hand, which had signed million-dollar contracts without a flicker, I made it shake. I let a tear well up just when I looked at him, my boy, and I saw a stranger sitting in his skin, eager to be rid of me. And I signed Margaret Finch, and right next to it on a separate, seemingly innocuous document for the Trust's annual review, one signed again, Margaret Finch, trustee. He never noticed the difference. He saw the sad old woman signing away her freedom. He didn't see the CEO securing her next acquisition. The first few weeks at Silvercrest were educational. David visited once, maybe twice, head bustling, full of excuses about traffic, about meetings. He'd pat my hand, look around the room with a barely concealed distaste, and then his phone would ring. It was always so urgent. He'd leave a box of chocolates, a hollow promise to visit soon, and then had vanished. The calls became less frequent, then they stopped altogether. A text message on my birthday, a floral arrangement at Christmas charged to an account I was still paying for. The silence was his answer to my question. It was clearer than any words. But I wasn't sitting in a room fading away. I was on the clock while he thought I was watching daytime television. I was watching everything. I learned the rhythms of the place. I saw Nurse Henderson on the night shift, who always took an extra 5 minutes to chat with Mr. Gable in room 112 because he was afraid of the dark. I saw the admin assistant, Sarah, who knew every resident's grandchildren by name. I also saw the cracks, the plumbing in the east wing that groaned and rattled, the dated physical therapy equipment, the high staff turnover because the pay was just a hair above insulting. I became a resident. I played bingo. I drank weak tea in the common room, And I listened to the aides, to the cooks, to the maintenance men. I learned who cared and who was just collecting a paycheck. I knew more about the day-to-day running of Silvercrest than any of the previous corporate owners ever had. They were a faceless entity, a name on a pay stub. I was the woman in room 200 for who always remembered to ask about their kids' soccer game. They had no idea that our casual chats were my due diligence, that every complaint about a leaky faucet was filed away in my mind not as a grievance, but as a work order for the future. The months turned into a year. The trust's provisions were very specific: a quiet, passive ownership for a set period, followed by a full activation of controlling interest. The date was approaching. I instructed my lawyer, a man who had been with me for 40 years and understood discretion, to initiate the process. We made an offer for the parent company. It was generous but firm. They accepted. The transition was seamless, silent, and then the letters went out. David received his own thick, expensive stationery, a formal notice from the new ownership of Silvercrest Manor Holdings LLC. It requested his presence as the primary contact for resident Margaret Finch at a mandatory meeting to discuss the future of the facility. I can only imagine his confusion, his annoyance. He probably thought it was about raising rates, some bureaucratic nonsense. He wouldn't have wanted his monthly auto payment to be disturbed. The day he arrived, I watched him from my window. He pulled up in his new sports car, a flashy, impractical thing. He strode toward the entrance dressed in his best power suit, ready to deal with some mid-level manager. He was going to be assertive. He was going to make it clear that he was a busy man, that this had better be important. He was met by Sarah, the admin assistant, who smiled politely and directed him to the main conference room, a space I'm sure he never knew existed. I waited until he was seated. I could picture him there, tapping his fingers on the polished table, annoyed. I took a final look in the mirror. I'd chosen a suit I hadn't worn in years, a sharp navy blue Chanel. I had my hair done. I looked like Margaret Finch, the founder, the chairwoman, not Margaret Finch, the forgotten mother, in room 200. For I walked into the boardroom. The door opening broke his reverie. He looked up, expecting a stranger. The color drained from his face. It was a beautiful slow motion collapse. His jaw went slack. His eyes darted from me to the room, to the portrait of the building's original founder on the wall, then back to me. He couldn't process it. It was like watching a computer crash. Mom, what are you doing here? Are you lost? I didn't smile. I took my seat at the head of the table. My lawyer was to my right, the no former manager to my left. David, I said, my voice, even the tremor I'd faked for so long, completely gone. Thank you for coming in. Glad you could make time in your busy schedule. I let that hang in the air for a moment. Allow me to introduce myself properly. I am Margaret Finch, the majority owner and chairperson of Silvercrest Manor Holdings. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I saw the pieces click into place in his mind: the feigned illness, the signed paperwork, the quiet year. It was all a trap, and he had walked right into it. His shock turned to a flush of anger, then a sickly pale dread. You set me up, he stammered. It wasn't a question. This meeting, I continued as if he had spoken, is to inform you of the new operational policies effective immediately. All staff will receive a 20% raise. A full audit of the physical plant is underway with a renovation budget already approved. Patient care standards are being raised significantly. I looked directly at him. Furthermore, a new clause is being added to the resident charter It prohibits visitation rights to any individual deemed to have acted against the residents' well-being for personal or financial gain. Your presence here, David, is now a violation of that policy. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a kind of animal panic. You can't do that. I'm your son, are you? I asked, my voice terribly quiet. The son I knew would have visited, the son I knew would have cared if I was happy, not just if I was quiet. You abandoned me here. You saw a burden. I saw an opportunity. I have taken control of my legacy, David, and you are no longer part of its security. Will see you out. He tried to speak, to argue, to plead, but the words wouldn't come. Two of the orderlies, men I'd personally commended for their patience and strength, entered the room. They didn't touch him, they just stood by the door, a silent, immovable force. He looked from them to my lawyer's impassive face, and finally back to me. The mask of the successful son was gone. What was left was just a small, greedy man who had lost everything he truly valued because he never understood what it was. He stood up, his shoulders slumped, and walked out without another word. I sat there for a long time after he was gone. The room was quiet. There was no triumph, no glorious victory. There was just a profound and peaceful silence. Later that afternoon I walked the grounds. I stopped to talk to Mr. Gable about his fear of the dark, and I authorized the installation of new, softer nightlights in all the hallways. I approved the order for the new hydraulic therapy table. I spoke with Nurse Henderson about the new staffing ratios. This was my home now, not a prison, but a kingdom. I had purged it of the one thing that was poisoning it. The irony is he put me here to forget me, and in doing so he gave me a purpose, a community, a second act more meaningful than the first. He thought he was storing me away. He was just returning me to the soil I was meant to cultivate, and for the first time in a very long time I was truly, completely at home. The phone would ring, and I knew it was him. Before I even looked at specific impatient ringtone, I'd pick it up, and his voice would be all syrup and smiles. At first, "Hi, Mom, just checking in," but it never stayed that way for long. The conversation always turned to money, my money. He had this way of talking about my house, my things, as if they were already his. He'd say things like, "You know, when the time comes it'll be so much easier if everything is already sorted." He meant the will. He was obsessed with the will. He'd send me links to articles about probate and estate taxes like he was doing me a favor. Had come over and walk around the living room, not seeing the memories in the furniture, just seeing dollar signs. Had run his hand over the mahogany table your father and I bought on our 10th anniversary. "This is solid," he'd say. "This'll fetch a good price." I tried to tell him once about how I built that little catering business from the ground up after his father passed, how I'd work 16-hour days frosting cupcakes at midnight just to keep a roof over our heads. He'd just wave a hand. "Ancient history, Mom, that's all in the past. You should be relaxing now." He didn't want to hear about the work, he just wanted the result. He saw me as a finished product, a vault that needed to be opened. The combination was my signature on a piece of paper. The pressure got worse. The vague answers I gave him about my plans, about the legal details, they started to frustrate him. The syrup in his voice would evaporate, leaving something sharper behind. "We need to be practical, Mother." Had say, "You're not getting any younger." Then he started talking about my safety, about how the house was too big, the stairs were a hazard. He painted a picture of me as this frail, helpless thing, a liability. He orchestrated it all so perfectly. He found the nursing home Shady Oaks, he called it. It's one of the best. He arranged the movers. He even held a garage sale for my things, my entire life packed into cardboard boxes with price tags on them. I watched from the window as strangers haggled over my wedding china. He told me it was for the best. He said I'd be more comfortable, and all the while I could see the calculation in his eyes. This was him securing his inheritance early, getting me out of the way, liquidating their assets, and positioning himself as the dutiful son who handled it all. The day he drove me to Shady Oaks, he was practically giddy. He talked nonstop about his plans for the money, from the house sale, a new car, a vacation home. He helped me unpack a single suitcase in my new room. The room was small, sterile, a bed, a chair, a nightstand. He stood in the doorway and said, "See, isn't this much more manageable?" Then he left, and I sat down on that stiff bed, and I looked out the window at a garden I didn't plant, and I felt a profound quiet, heartbreak. But underneath the heartbreak there was a resolve, a cold, hard piece of steel right in my center, because he had made one fatal mistake. He never asked how I could afford Shady Oaks. He just assumed I could. He never thought to question it. You see, Shady Oaks wasn't just a nursing home to me. It was my project, my second act. After I sold the catering business, I didn't just sit on the money. I invested quietly through a holding company with a name he would never recognize. I saw a need for a place that was truly dignified, truly caring for seniors, and I built it. I owned it, every brick, every blade of grass. The staff knew me as the benefactor, the silent partner who made surprise visits to check on the residents. They knew me as Eleanor, the new resident, whose son had so thoughtfully arranged her stay. They played their parts beautifully, and so I settled, and I became a silent observer in my own kingdom. I'd sit in the common room knitting, and I'd watch the television he bought for me. Had set up a social media account for me, he said, so I could stay connected. What he really wanted was a window away for me to see his new life, and I saw it. I saw all of it. The photos of him standing next to a shiny new sports car, finally living the dream. Had written the pictures from a resort in Bali, paradise. Hard work pays off. He was flaunting it. The money from my house, from my life, was funding his fantasy. Had tagged me in comments saying, "So glad my mom is safe and sound so I can enjoy this." He thought it made him look good, a grateful son. All I saw was the celebration of my erasure. I didn't say a word. I just watched. I took screenshots. I saved every post, every boastful comment. I had my lawyer send me records of the estate sales, the bank transfers. I built a case not for a courtroom, but for a reckoning. I bided my time. I got to know the other residents. I listened to their stories. I found a peace here, a purpose that I had never found in my empty house. I was waiting for the right moment. The moment came with the invitation. Shady Oaks was having a grand reopening gala. We'd renovated the West Wing, added a new physical therapy center. It was a big event. Local dignitaries, business leaders, donors. I knew he would come. How could he not? This was part of his narrative, the successful son checking in on his mother's luxurious retirement home. He arrived in a new suit, smiling, shaking hands. I watched him from across the room. He was in his element, schmoozing, playing the big shot. He even came over to me, patted my hand condescendingly. "You look well, mother. This place really agrees with you." He had no idea the director of the home, a wonderful woman named Sarah, who had been my proc from the Catering Days took the microphone. She gave a speech about community, about dignity in later life. Then she said, "And now we have a very special acknowledgement. We owe so much of our success, our very existence, to the vision and generosity of our benefactor, the person who believed in this project when it was just a dream." A large screen lit up behind her. My son was smiling, nodding, probably expecting to see the name of some corporation he could network with. Then he saw it. His smile froze. It was my name, my full legal name, Eleanor Margaret Vance, in huge, elegant letters on the screen. The room erupted in applause. But he wasn't clapping, he was just staring. The color drained from his face. I saw him lean forward, squinting as if his eyes were deceiving him. Sarah continued, her voice clear and strong. "But what's even more remarkable is that our benefactor is not just a name on a plaque. She is one of us. She is a resident here at Shady Oaks. She has chosen to live among the community she helped build." Every head in the room turned. They looked from the screen to me. Sitting quietly in my chair, the applause faltered, then started again, louder, more confused. Cameras flashed. I saw the faces of his business associates. I saw the dawning comprehension, the shock, and then the slow, ugly spread of judgment. They were putting it together. The son, who had prayed at his mother here as his dependent, was in fact standing in her house on her property. He had sold her home to fund his lifestyle, while she sat silently in the heart of an empire he never knew she had. He looked at me for the first time in years. He truly looked at me, and I held his gaze. There was no anger in my eyes, just a deep, weary calm. The mask of the dutiful son shattered into 1,000 pieces, and what was left was just exposed, greedy little boy. Sarah handed me the microphone. The room went utterly silent. I stood up. My voice was steady. It didn't tremble. "Thank you," I said. "This home has been my greatest pride. It represents a belief that our later years should be filled with respect and purpose, and it has come to my attention that the management of my personal estate, the one I built before this place, has been mishandled." I didn't look at him. I spoke to the crowd. "As of today, all my assets, my entire estate, will be liquidated, and every penny will be donated to a network of charities supporting senior citizens in need. This home, Shady Oaks, will become a non-profit foundation, ensuring its mission continues long after I'm gone." The silence broke into a murmur, then into applause. But it wasn't for me. It was a wave of collective judgment against the man standing pale and stricken in the middle of it. I saw him take a step back, then another. The people he had been trying to impress moments ago were now looking at him with pity, or worse, with disgust. His reputation, the carefully crafted image of the successful heir, evaporated in that room. The business deals he was counting on, the connections, they crumbled to dust right in front of him. He didn't say a word. He just turned and pushed his way through the crowd. I saw his back as he hurried toward the exit. He couldn't get out fast enough. The grand doors swung shut behind him. The party continued around me. The music started up again. People came to talk to me, to thank me, but for a moment everything felt muffled and distant. I had, when I had secured my legacy and exposed his truth, but the victory tasted like ashes. He was still my son, the little boy I read stories to, and I had just publicly dismantled his entire life. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought I would feel vindicated, but mostly I felt tired and sad. The money, the property, the company, it was never really about any of that. It was about the look in his eyes when he saw his name wasn't on the screen. It was about the final terrible understanding that his Mother wasn't a obstacle to his wealth, she was the source of it, and he had thrown the source away. He was left with nothing but the consequences of his own greed, and I was left with a quiet, spacious peace. A purpose that was entirely my own. The karmic justice was perfect and absolute, and it was terribly lonely. I knew from the very beginning, not all of it, of course, not the details, of how it would end, standing in that room with the legal documents spread out between us like a declaration of war. But I knew the shape of his heart, my son. I saw the calculation in his eyes long before he ever had the power to act on it. It was there at family dinners when he'd asked a little too casually about quarterly returns. It was in the way he'd compliment the house, not as a home filled with memories, but as a valuable piece of real estate. A mother knows it's a click because it's true. You feel it in the pauses between words and the subtle shift of affection that becomes transactional. Building the business wasn't just about wealth, it was about creating something lasting, a testament to the work of my hands and my mind. I started with nothing but an idea and a relentless drive, working late into the night while he was asleep, building a life for us. I thought I was doing it for him, for our future. But as the empire grew, so did the distance between us. He saw the success, the money, the properties. He never saw the sacrifice. He saw an inheritance, not a legacy. The idea didn't come to me in a flash of anger. It was a slow, cold drip of realization. He was waiting. He was positioned like a patient chess player for the moment I would become a burden, the moment he could step in and take control. And I thought, if that's the game he wants to play, then I will change the board entirely. The nursing home, Willow Creek, was always my favorite asset, not the most profitable, but the most meaningful, a place of peace. I began the process in utter secrecy. The lawyers were discreet, paid a fortune for their silence. I transferred the entire property, the holding company, everything, into an irrevocable trust. The name on the paperwork was an old pseudonym I'd used in my earliest business ventures, a name he would never think to connect to me. It was a calculated risk, the biggest gamble of my life. I was betting that my own son would abandon me, and I was betting that I was strong enough to survive, proving myself right. The day I agreed to move into Willow Creek was the loneliest day of my life, even lonelier than when his father passed. He was so pleased with himself, so convincing in his performance of concern duty. It's for the best, Mom. You'll have round thecklek carrots, what Dad would have wanted. He used his father's memory as a tool, and that cut deeper than anything. I packed a single suitcase with my clothes and a few personal items. I left the family photos on the mantel. I let him believe he had one. I walked through those doors not as the owner, but as a resident. I had to see it. I had to see the charade fall away with my own eyes, to cauterize the wand of hope that still bled inside me. The first few weeks were the hardest. The sting of abandonment was a physical pain, a constant ache in my chest. The silence from him was absolute. No phone calls, no visits, just a void where a son should have been. I'd lie in my bed at night in this room I technically owned, and I would grapple with the reality I had allowed this to happen. I had set this trap and walked right into it. The hurt was real, a deep emotion, all wound that threatened to swallow me whole. But I had planned for this too. I knew the despair would come, so I had built myself a lifeline. I channeled all that pain into purpose. My meetings with Sarah, the manager, were my salvation. To everyone else, she was just being kind. Spending time with a new resident, we'd sit in the garden and ID asked questions. The hydrangeas on the east side are wilting. The soil might be too alkaline, or I noticed the schedule for the physical therapist seems a bit rushed for Mr. Gable in room 214. I offered suggestions, quietly careful never to overstep. Sarah was sharp. I think she suspected I was more than I seemed, but she never pressed. We discussed operational efficiencies, staff morale, patient care models. It was like flexing a muscle I hadn't used in years. My mind was still here. My human was sharp. With every conversation I felt a piece of my strength returning. And then there were the others, the residents. I had been so focused on my own familial drama that I had considered the community waiting for me. Eleanor, a former history professor who could recite Shakespeare by heart, Arthur, who had been a carpenter, and whose hands, though gnarled with arthritis, could still whittle the most beautiful little birds. We were a collection of cast-offs, people whose families were too busy or too far away, or like my son, simply too disinterested. We found a family in each other. We played cards, we shared stories. I learned that my value wasn't tied to my net worth or my role as a mother. It was in the laughter I shared over a hand of bridge, in the quiet comfort of sitting with someone who was lonely. I was building a new life, a real one, within these walls. The empire I had built outside seemed hollow compared to the simple trust I was earning here. The legal notice was my idea. It was time I had gathered all the evidence I needed, not from corporate espionage, but from simple observation. I had kept a small, elegant journal, not a diary of sorrow, but a log. Dates, times, the unanswered calls ID made from the home's phone, the birthdays and holidays that passed without a word. The one time he did call the front desk, not to speak to me, but to ask about the procedure for selling a resident's personal assets from storage. I recorded it, all with the cold precision of a court stenographer. The notice was formal, dry. It stated that due to concerns regarding his conduct as power of attorney, his presence was required for a review. I knew how he would interpret it. He would think it was a bureaucratic hurdle, an annoyance from the administration. He would arrive ready to bulldoze his way through it with charm and arrogance. The day he arrived, I dressed with more care than I had in months, a simple but elegant navy blue dress. I sat at the head of the large mahogany table in the administrator's conference room. Sarah sat to my right. Our lawyer, a severe-faced woman named Miss Vance, sat to my left. The air in the room was still. I could hear the distant sound of a lawnmower outside, then the sound of his footsteps in the hall, confident, impatient. The door opened. The look on his face will be etched in my memory forever. It was a perfect slide show of his entire character. First annoyance as he scanned the room for some faceless administrator, then confusion as his eyes landed on me. Why was his mother sitting at the head of the table? And finally a slow dawning, stupefied shock as the pieces clicked into place. The expensive art on the walls, the impeccable maintenance had vaguely noted on his way, and the respect in Sarah's posture as she looked at me. His face lost all its color. Mother, what is this? What are you doing here? I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply looked at him. My son, a stranger, a well-cut suit. I own it, I said, my voice remarkably steady. I have always owned it. Ms. Vance slid a copy of the trust documents across the table. He didn't pick them up. He just stared at the pseudonym, the name he didn't recognize, and then back at me. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a sputtering, wounded pride. This is a trick. You set me up. I allowed you To reveal yourself, I corrected him gently. Then I opened my journal. I didn't read from it dramatically. I simply placed it on the table. This is a record of your stewardship as my power of attorney. It details your complete and total neglect, your absence, your disinterest in my well-being beyond the assets you assumed you were securing. I watched him as the truth settled over him. This wasn't an emotional outburst from a hurt old woman. This was a cold, hard, premeditated dismantling of his plans. He had been outmaneuvered by the very person he thought he had safely stored away. There was no shouting match, no tears from me. His voice rose in protest, full of excuses and accusations, but they sounded hollow and small in the quiet room. Ms. Vance interrupted him with legal precision, outlining the steps. We were taking. The power of attorney was revoked effective immediately. He was to provide a full accounting of his actions, and any funds improperly used would be pursued. He was being removed from all legal and financial ties to me. It was a complete severance. When it was over, he just stood there, deflated. The confrontation wasn't fiery, it was forensic. I had dissected our relationship and found it terminally ill. My victory was not joyful. There was no triumph in seeing my own child humiliated. There was only a profound, bittersweet finality. I had needed to do this to save myself, to protect the life I had built and the new family I had found. But as he turned to leave, his shoulders slumped apart. Of me, the mother who had once rocked him to sleep, ached with a loss so deep it felt like a physical absence. He left without another word. The door closed softly behind him. The room was silent again, save for the steady tick of the clock on the wall. Sarah and Miss Vance looked at me, waiting. I took deep breath, the first full breath I felt I'd taken in years. The battle was over. My life now is not what I once imagined. The mansion is empty. The corporate headquarters runs smoothly without my daily involvement. My fulfillment comes from here, from Willow Creek. I use the wealth, the empire I built, for something real. We've started new music therapy programs. We've renovated the gardens. I sit with Eleanor and Arthur every day. We are a family of choice, bound not by blood, but by mutual care and the shared understanding of what it means to be left behind. I learned the hardest lesson of all that strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about taking that hurt and using it to build a different kind of foundation, one made of honesty and chosen love. And in the quiet of the evening, that feels like a victory, more valuable than any on a balance sheet. The drive over to her house felt different this time. It wasn't the familiar trip to visit Mom. It was a mission. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I kept telling myself this was the only logical choice. The doctor said she needed constant supervision. That fall she took last month, it was a wake-up call, a practical one. I'm a busy man. I have a career, a life. I can't be there 24/7 to make sure she doesn't slip in the bathroom or forget to take her medication. It's just not feasible. And honestly, the constant calls were starting to wear on me. Every little thing was a crisis. The TV remote wasn't working. She couldn't find a specific brand of tea at the store. It was always something. I'd hear the phone ring and feel this immediate sense of dread. I started letting it go to voicemail more and more. I told myself I was just managing my stress, setting boundaries. That's what all the articles say to do, right? Set boundaries with aging parents. Selling the house, that was just sound financial planning. The money from the sale would cover the nursing home fees for a long time. It's not like she was ever going to live there again. It was an asset sitting empty gathering dust. I was just being responsible, liquidating an asset to fund her care, and if there was a little left over, well, I'd earned it after all the years of dealing with everything, after putting my own life on hold more times than I could count. A little compensation for my trouble didn't seem unreasonable. I'd convinced myself it was practically my due. The day we moved her into Sunset Gardens, she was so quiet she just looked out the car window the whole time. I tried to make conversation, talking about the activities they had, the nice gardens. She didn't say a word. When we got her settled in the room, she finally spoke. Her voice was very small. She said, "This feels very final." I patted her hand and told her not to be so dramatic, that it was for the best. I remember the way she looked at me then. It wasn't anger, it was something worse. It was a kind of quiet disappointment that seemed to sink right into my bones. I shook it off. I told myself she was just being emotional. That should adjust. Everyone adjusts. The first few months were a relief. I'm not going to lie, the silence in my own apartment was glorious. No more unexpected phone calls, no more rushing over because of some minor emergency. I used some of the money from the house sale to buy a new car. Nothing too flashy, but nice. I deserved it. I went on a couple of trips. I felt free, unburdened. This was the life I was supposed to be living. But then little things started to poke at the edges of my contentment. Like that nurse Sarah, she was always so capable, so efficient. But sometimes I'd catch her looking at me. It wasn't a friendly look. It was more like she was studying me, like I was a specimen under a glass. There was a knowingness in her eyes that made me uncomfortable. I'd ask how Mom was doing, and she'd give these very precise clinical answers. Her vitals are stable. She attended music therapy today, but her eyes would say something else. They'd say, "I know what you did." I told myself I was being paranoid. She was just a thorough professional. Then there was the mail. I was over at my mom's old house. Now I had to start thinking of it that way, getting it ready to put on the market. A letter came for her. It wasn't a bill or a personal letter. It was on thick, expensive stationery from a law firm. I'd never heard of it. Was addressed to her at the nursing home. That was strange. Why would a law firm be writing to her there? I almost opened it, but I stopped myself. It felt like a line I shouldn't cross. Besides, it was probably just some routine legal thing related to this state. I threw it in a drawer and forgot about it. It was easier to forget. I was so focused on the next step, selling the house. I found a buyer quickly, a young couple who seemed perfect. We were deep into the process, almost at the closing date, when my realtor called. His voice was confused. He said there was a problem with the title. A hold had been placed on the property by a trust. The trust's name was something vague, something like the Evergreen Legacy Trust. I'd never heard of it. I was furious. I thought it was some bureaucratic error, a mistake from when my dad died years ago. I spent days on the phone with the title company, demanding they fix it. They were polite but unhelpful. They said the hold was legal and binding, and only the trustee could release it. I had no idea who that was. It was a frustrating, opaque wall. I remember sitting in my new car outside the empty house, screaming at some poor clerk on the phone. This was my money, my freedom. How dare they block this? That's when the official letter came, not to the house, but to my apartment. It was from the corporate office of the company that owned the Sunset Gardens chain. It requested my presence at a meeting to discuss matters pertaining to my mother's residency and the associated financial arrangements. My heart sank. This was it. They were going to raise the rates with. The house sale stalled. I didn't know how I was going to afford a huge increase. I felt a surge of anger at my mother for needing such an expensive place for complicating my life. Even from inside a nursing home, I prepared myself for a fight. I dressed in my best suit. I was going to negotiate to tell them what I could realistically pay. The corporate office was in a sleek downtown high-rise. It felt nothing like the quiet carpeted halls of the nursing home. This was a place of power and money. I was led into a conference room with a long polished table. The view of the city was impressive. I expected to meet with a stuffy administrator, but when the door opened, it was my mother who walked in. She wasn't being helped. She walked in under her own power, dressed not in a housecoat, but in a sharp tailored suit I'd never seen before. Her hair was done. She carried a leather-bound folder. She looked like a CEO. The woman I had seen just a week before, who seemed frail and needed help cutting her food, was gone. In her place was a stranger radiating a calm, terrifying authority. She didn't look ill. She looked in complete control. She didn't even look at me at first. She placed the folder on the table and sat down at the head of it, and she lifted her eyes to mine. There was no warmth in them, no recognition. They were those of a strategist assessing an opponent. "Thank you for coming," she said. Her voice was clear and firm, without a trace of the tremor I'd grown used to. "Let's discuss the terms of your eviction from my life." I actually laughed. It was a nervous, choked sound. "Mom, what is this? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you have been living in a house you do not own," she said, opening the folder. "You have been spending money that is not yours, and you placed me in a facility that, as it happens, I own." The words didn't make sense at first. They just hung in the air between us. "I own it." The pieces started crashing together in my head. The law firm letter, the mysterious trust holding the title, the nurse's knowing looks. It wasn't paranoia. It was all real. She had never been the helpless old woman I believed her to be. She had been watching me the entire time. She had let me dig my own grave. My face grew hot. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. You own Sunset Gardens?" "The chain, yes," she said calmly. "I founded it with your father before he passed. The Evergreen Legacy Trust was our retirement plan. It holds the majority shares. I never signed over power of attorney to you, David. You assumed it. You took control of accounts that were merely in my name, but you never touched the core assets. You never could." I started pleading, then the words tumbled out. "Mom, I was just trying to do what was best for you. The doctor said you needed care." I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what else to do. It all sounded so weak, so pathetic, even to my own ears. She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "You didn't ask. You decided. You decided I was a burden to be managed. You decided my home was your reward. You saw an ending. I saw a test, and you failed it spectacularly." She slid a document across the table. "It was a legal agreement. This severs all your financial claims. The house reverts to the trust. The money you took from the sale has been returned from your accounts. There is also a restraining order preventing you from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of any of my residences or places of business." I stared at the paper. The words blurred. "You can't do this. I'm your son." For the first time her expression softened, but it wasn't with kindness. It was with a profound, bottomless sadness. "I had a son once. I remember him. He was a boy who would cry when he scraped his knee, and I would kiss it better. That boy is gone. What's left is a greedy stranger who saw me as a ledger entry. This isn't a punishment, David. It's a correction." She stood up. "The meeting was over. Goodbye." I just sat There long after she left, the polished table reflected my own stunned face back at me, my grand plans, my new car, my sense of freedom. It was all an illusion. I had been so arrogant, I thought. I was so clever managing her money the whole time. I was the one being managed. I was the one in the cage, and she had simply been waiting for me to lock the door myself. I discarded the one person who ever truly loved me, not for who I was, but despite who I had become, and I did it for a price. That turned out to be nothing at all. I thought I was inheriting a fortune, but I was just a tenant who didn't read the lease. And now the lease is up. I'm evicted from her life, from my own inheritance, from everything. The silence in my apartment now isn't peaceful. It's the sound of my own emptiness. I had it all wrong. The nursing home wasn't for her. It was just the setting for my own confinement. And I walked myself right in. 20 years ago, my son Michael looked at our first successful apartment complex, one we'd fought so hard to get off the ground, and he didn't see a home for families. He saw a price tag. That was the first red flag. But he was my son. I made excuses. I told myself he was just ambitious. But I am and always have been a strategist. I built an empire out of vacant lots and dismissed opportunities. So when he started pushing ever so gently for me to sign over power of attorney to simplify things, my instincts went on high alert. I saw the future. He had mapped out for me a quiet, slow decline in some sterile facility while he liquidated my life's work. So I decided to build him a custom-made prison. I decided to play the long game. It began with the Cypress Grove Senior Living Center. I read about it in a trade journal. Mismanaged, underfunded, but with a beautiful, solid structure, great bones. It was a perfect, unloved asset, ripe for a turnaround. But I didn't want to turn it around for profit. I wanted to turn it into a trap. My first move was the corporate veil. I didn't just set up one shell company. I set up a cascade of them, a limited liability company in Delaware owned by a trust in the Cayman Islands, which was in turn managed by a silent partnership based in Luxembourg. My name was buried so deep in legal documents that it would take a forensic accountant months to find it, and the only lawyer who knew the full picture was a man named Arthur Finch, who had handled my most sensitive deals for 40 years. He was the only person I trusted. We purchased the Cypress Grove through a subsidiary of a subsidiary for a song. The previous owners were just relieved to be rid of it. Then I began my performance, The Mental Decline. It was a masterpiece of subtlety. I'd forget a word in the middle of a sentence, a word I knew perfectly well. I'd stare blankly at a restaurant bill, pretending to be confused by the math. I'd call Michael and ask him how to work the television, the same television I'd been using for a decade. I'd let little things slip in conversation, worries about money, about being a burden. I was planting seeds, and he was such fertile ground. He was so ready to believe I was fading. He started mentioning supported living and communities with full-time care. I'd just nod vaguely and changed the subject to a childhood memory, something to reinforce the image of a wistful, fading old woman. The real genius was the Cypress Grove brochure. I had a new glossy one designed under the new anonymous ownership, positioning it as a premium facility. I left it on my coffee table. He found it, of course, and I sat there watching him as he devoured the pictures of the renovated rooms, the peaceful gardens. He thought it was his idea. He said, "Mom, look at this place. It's perfect for you. We should go take a tour." And I just smiled a slow, gentle smile and said, "If You think it's best, dear. You always know what's best. The setup was immaculate. He was so eager. He moved through the power of attorney paperwork with a hunger that was almost indecent. He sold the apartment complexes, the commercial properties, even the small portfolio of stocks my husband had left me. He thought he was consolidating my assets, putting everything into liquid cash. What he didn't know was that a significant portion of that cash was being quietly funneled through a series of vendor payments and capital improvement invoices right back into the Cypress Grove. He was using my money, my life's work, to fund the very facility that was to be my gilded cage and its transformation into a truly luxurious prison. Arthur Finch ensured every transaction was perfectly legal and meticulously documented. Every check Michael signed, every transfer he authorized was another brick in the wall he was building around himself. I moved and I played my part to perfection. I was the slightly confused, grateful mother. I'd thank him profusely for finding me such a wonderful place. I'd tell the staff how lucky I was to have such a caring son. Meanwhile, I was overseeing everything: the new security system, my design, the hiring of the head nurse, a fiercely ethical woman who reported directly to me, my decision, the renovation of the West Wing. I approved the plans from my suite, which was wired with a secure private line to Arthur's office. I was the invisible CEO, and my son was my unwitting, greedy junior executive, reporting on his own mismanagement for 2 years. This was our reality. He'd visit, his condescension palpable. He'd talk slowly as if to a child, updating me on how well our finances were doing, never realizing he was giving me an operational report on my own company. He thought I was getting weaker. In reality, I was getting stronger, building a new empire right under his nose, funded by his own avarice. The checkmate was Arthur's idea. He called it the final board meeting. He sent a formal letter to Michael on the official letterhead of the holding company that owned the Cypress Grove. It stated that following the presumed imminent passing of the majority beneficiary of the estate, a meeting was required to settle the facility's future and the disposition of assets tied to it. It was a masterpiece of legal language, implying everything without stating anything directly. Michael arrived at the nursing home that day dressed for a funeral, or rather for a reading of the will. He had that specific, poorly concealed look of grim satisfaction. He was met at the door not by a nurse, but by Arthur Finch, who guided him to the conservatory, the most beautiful room in the building with floor-to-ceiling windows. I was already there, sitting at the head of a mahogany table. I wasn't in a patient's gown. I was wearing a suit, the same kind of sharp, tailored suit I'd worn to close deals for 40 years. The look on his face was worth every second of the 2-year charade. The color drained from him, his mouth open, but no sound came out. It was pure, unadulterated shock. I didn't smile. I simply gestured for him to sit. Arthur took a seat beside me and placed a thick folder on the table. And then I began to talk. My voice was clear, steady, the voice of the boardroom, not the bedside. I walked him through it. I started with the initial purchase of the Cypress Grove, showing him the transaction records from the shell companies leading back to a trust he had never known existed. I showed him the financials, the flow of funds, how the money from the sale of my properties had been used to pay inflated invoices from construction and supply companies that were, of course, also owned by me. He had been liquidating my assets to fund my own revenge. I showed him the documents he had signed, the power of attorney forms had been so eager to push through the authorization for the property sales. Arthur explained in his calm, dry tone how Michael had in his haste committed several technical but serious breaches of his fiduciary duty. He had commingled funds. He had failed to seek multiple independent appraisals on the sold properties, resulting in sales that could be construed as significantly below market value, benefiting the anonymous buyer, which was of course me. He had a paper trail of his own greed, a trail he had built himself, and we had every single page of it. The final piece was the new order. I told him that the Cypress Grove was no longer just a nursing home, it was the flagship of a new foundation, the Legacy Foundation, dedicated to ethical elder care. Its mission would be to protect seniors from exactly the kind of financial predation he had attempted. We would use the very wealth he tried to steal to create a model that would expose systems like the one he thought he was orchestrating. And then I delivered the last blow. Arthur slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a summary sent that morning to the state's Attorney General's office and the Securities and Exchange Commission, outlining the evidence of financial misconduct. We weren't pressing charges ourselves. That would be a messy personal affair. We were simply providing the evidence. It would be up to the authorities to decide if they wanted to investigate him for fraud. His reputation, his standing in the business community was already ashes. Now his freedom was in question. He didn't say a word. He just stared at the table, at the damning files, at me. The man who thought he was so smart, so cunning, was utterly defeated. He had been outmaneuvered. At every turn he stood up his chair, scraping against the floor, and walked out of the conservatory. He didn't look back. I watched him go. There was no victory in it, just a cold, quiet finality. He thought he was moving me into a nursing home to forget me. Instead, I built a fortress. He thought he was inheriting an empire. Instead, he inherited a labyrinth of his own making, and at the center of it he found not a frail old woman, but the competitor he never knew he was facing. The game is over, and he finally understands that the house always wins the first crack. In our family wasn't a loud, dramatic break. It was a slow, quiet seepage, like a pipe leaking behind a wall. You don't notice the damage until the whole structure is soft and rotten. My son David was that leak, and my daughter Sarah, she was the dry, solid ground. I could still stand on. David started visiting less. Oh, he had all the reasons. Work was so demanding. The kids had so many activities. But when he did come, it was different. I'd look around my apartment, this cozy little place I'd made my own after his father passed, and his eyes would just calculate. Had mentioned property values, property taxes, had talk about how much easier my life would be in one of those managed living communities. He said it was for my safety, for my peace of mind. But I knew I'd seen that look in his father's eyes when he was sizing up a business rival. It was the look of a man assessing an asset. Sarah, though Sarah came every Sunday, rain or shine, she'd bring soup if I had a cold, a new book if I was just bored. We'd sit at my little kitchen table and talk for hours, not about money or assets, but about her job, her garden, the novel she was reading. She saw me, not my bank account, not my property. Me, I began to hear things, little whispers from my sister, from my cousins. David was talking. He was telling everyone who would listen that I was becoming difficult, that I was forgetful, financially irresponsible. He said I'd nearly set the kitchen on fire, boiling an empty pot, a complete lie. He said I was giving money to television charities, an exaggeration, from a single donation I'd made. Years ago he was building a case, painting a picture of a frail, confused old woman who needed to be managed. He was laying the groundwork, and it made me sick. It was during one of Sarah's Sunday visits that I decided to trust her completely. We were drinking tea, and I just felt so tired, not physically tired, but soul tired. I looked at her, at the kindness in her eyes, and I said, he thinks I'm broke. He thinks I've spent nearly everything. Sarah put her cup down slowly. She knew I was far from broke. She helped me with my taxes. She knew about the investments, the quiet success of the small business my husband and I had built. The fact that I owned my apartment outright. I told her my plan. I'm going to let him believe it. I said I'm going to play the part he's written for me. I saw the understanding dawn on her face, followed by a flicker of fear. Mom, are you sure? She asked. But I was sure. I needed to see how far he would go. I needed the rest of the family to see it too, and I needed her to be my eyes and ears, my secret ally. She reached across the table and took my hand. There were no more words needed. We were a team. So began the performance. When David would visit, I'd lean into the character head created. I'd wear my oldest, most faded cardigan. I'd forget the name of his neighbor had told me about last week. I'd let my hand tremble just a little when I poured his coffee. I'd talk about how expensive everything had become, how the pension didn't stretch as far as it used to. I'd seem vulnerable, confused, and he balked. He swallowed it whole. He became bolder, more patronizing. He'd pat my hand and say, don't you worry about a thing, Mom will take care of it all. Once he was on the phone in my living room, talking to someone. I think it was his wife, and he said loud enough for me to hear, yes, well, we'll have to look at selling some of the older pieces, the silverware, maybe the grandfather clock. It's just collecting dust here, and we need to free up some liquidity for her care. He said it right in front of me, as if I weren't even there, as if I were a piece of furniture. I just stared out the window, pretending not to understand, my heart breaking inside my chest. Meanwhile, Sarah and I worked quietly. She started documenting everything. She'd record our phone calls with my permission, especially when David would call her to strategize about poor Mom's situation. She saved text messages where he outlined his plans to consolidate my assets. She took notes on dates and times of his visits, what he said, what he proposed. She even took pictures of family heirlooms, had mentioned selling, establishing their presence in my home. It was a quiet, meticulous gathering of evidence. I guided her, reminding her of things had said weeks ago, helping her build the timeline of his betrayal. The final straw was when he started pressuring me about a power of attorney. He brought over the paperwork, all filled out with his name neatly typed in every important box. It's just a formality, Mom, he said, his voice slick and reassuring. In case you ever get sick and can't make decisions, it just makes things easier for everyone. I looked at that document and I saw my freedom being signed away. I told him I needed to think about it, that it was a big decision. He was annoyed, but he let it go for the moment. That's when I knew it was time. I told Sarah to set up a family meeting. I told her to call everyone of my sisters, their husbands, my late husband's brother, a few of the older cousins. I told her to tell them we were meeting to discuss my end-of-life wishes. It was the perfect bait. David would never miss it. He'd think it was his moment of victory. The day of the meeting arrived. They all gathered in my living room, perched on the sofa and the chairs we'd brought in from the kitchen. There was a nervous, somber energy in the room. They thought they were there to hear about my funeral plans. David arrived last with a confident Smile. He had a leather folder under his arm. I knew what was in it, the power of attorney documents. He came over and gave me a condescending kiss on the cheek. It's going to be okay, Mom, he whispered. I just smiled, a vague, gentle smile. Once everyone had settled, I stood up. I didn't look at David the first. Looked at my family. I saw the concern on their faces, the love, and I also saw the doubt that David had planted. I took a deep breath, and then I let the character I'd been playing for months just fall away. My voice, which I'd often let waver for David, was clear and steady. My posture straightened. The look in my eyes changed from confusion to sharp, painful clarity. Thank you all for coming, I began. I know David told you we're here to talk about my final wishes, and we are, but first I need to correct a misunderstanding. I could feel David tense up beside me. You see, I continued, there's been a story going around about me that I'm not, well, that I'm not capable, that I'm a financial burden. I turned and looked directly at my son. His face was beginning to pale. David has been kind enough to look out for me, so kind, in fact, that has been planning the liquidation of my estate for some time now. Murmurs rippled through the room. David started to speak. Mom, please, you're getting upset. I am not upset, David, I said, my voice cutting through his. I am lucid. I have never been more lucid, Sarah. Would you mind? Sarah, sitting quietly in the corner, stood up. She opened the folder she was holding. She began to speak, her voice calm and methodical. She played a recording of David talking about selling the grandfather clock. She read a text message where he discussed the power of attorney as the key to everything. She presented a list of the heirlooms had targeted with dates. She laid out the entire sordid plan in front of our entire family. The looks on their faces shifted from concern to dawning horror, and then to anger. They looked at David, and they saw what he was, a vulture. He tried to bluster, to say we were twisting his words, that we were ganging up on him. But the evidence was too clear. The mask was off. Then I delivered the final blow. The thing David never bothered to ask, I said, my voice quiet but filling the room, is how I could possibly afford this apartment, this life, if I were as broke as he thought. The truth is, the reason I'm not worried about my future care is because I don't need his money. I don't need anyone's money. When your father and I sold the business, we didn't just invest the money, we bought this building, this whole building. I'm not a tenant here, I'm the landlord. I own the nursing home. He was so eager to pack me off. To the silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. The shame on David's face was a physical thing. It was like watching a building collapse in on itself. He didn't say a word. He just stood up, looked at the disgusted faces of his aunts, uncles, and cousins, and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He just left. The sound of the door clicking shut was louder than any slam could have been. After he was gone, the room erupted, not in anger, but in a wave of support for me and for Sarah. My sister hugged me, crying, apologizing for ever doubting me. My brother-in-law shook his head, saying he'd had his suspicions, but never imagined it was this bad. They were all vindicating me, surrounding Sarah and me with a protective wall of family. In the weeks that followed, I did what I had to do. I met with my lawyer. I rewrote my will. I left my entire estate, the business, the building, everything to Sarah. I also set up substantial trusts for my grandchildren's children to be administered by Sarah, ensuring he could never touch a penny of it. The rest, a significant portion, I left to charities that support vulnerable seniors, a final irony that was not lost on me. David is estranged now, has tried to call, to send emails, but they're full of the same justifications. And blame I don't respond. The family has largely turned their backs on him. They saw his true character. And it was ugly. Now my life is quiet. The performance is over. Sarah still comes every Sunday. We still sit at the kitchen table, but the air is different. It's clear there are no more secrets between us, no more hidden battles to fight. We talk about the future now, my future, with a sense of peace. We overcame his betrayal together, and in the space he left behind, our relationship didn't just survive. It grew stronger, deeper, and more honest than I ever thought possible. The family drama is over. What's left is just family. I knew it the moment you and Sarah walked out of that lovely restaurant you'd taken me to for my birthday. You were on the phone with your business partner, your voice tight and impatient. And you didn't even notice your mother trying to catch your eye to say a proper goodbye. You just waved a hand, a dismissive little flick of the wrist, and slid into your expensive car. You left me standing on the curb watching your tail lights disappear. And in that moment I didn't just see my son. I saw a ghost of your father. He was a successful man, your father. He built an empire from nothing, just like you're trying to do, but he built it with his heart, with a sense of responsibility to the people who helped him. You're building yours with spreadsheets and a coldness that chills me to the bone. You measure everyone's worth by the zeros in their bank account, including mine, especially mine. I became a line item, David, a problem to be managed, an obligation. You started talking about downsizing my life, about consolidating assets you called the home I'd lived in for 40 years. An inefficient use of capital. That night after my birthday dinner I didn't sleep. I sat in my quiet living room surrounded by the photos of you as a boy who used to bring me dandelions and build blanket forts. That boy was gone, buried under ambition and a fear of ending up with nothing. You were so afraid of being poor that you became impoverished in every way that truly matters, and I realized my gentle hints, my careful suggestions, my quiet disappointments, they were like rain on stone. They weren't making a dent. You were lost, and I was the only one who could see the cliff you were walking towards. A mother sees these things. A mother knows the landscape of her child's soul even when it becomes overgrown with thorns. So I made a plan, a drastic one. It wasn't about revenge. I need you to understand that, David. It was never about revenge. It was surgery, a painful, necessary surgery to cut out the sickness that was consuming you. I decided I would show you the world you were creating. I would let you live in it. I would let you feel the consequences of your own philosophy, not as an abstract idea, but as a cold, hard reality. The nursing home was my idea. You thought it was yours, of course. You were so proud of yourself for finding Serenity Oaks, for negotiating the premium suite. You presented the brochures to me like you were bestowing a great gift, and I played my part. I let my hand tremble just a little as I took the papers. I let my voice quaver. I became the frail, confused old woman you already saw. When you looked at me, it was the hardest performance of my life, because every sigh of resignation, every tear I wiped away when you weren't looking, was a piece of my heart breaking. But it was a sacrifice, a mother's sacrifice. I owned Serenity Oaks, David. I bought the quiet, dignified place 5 years ago as an investment, but also as a quiet promise to myself that I would never be a burden. The staff knew me as the silent partner. They were my confidants in this strange, painful play I was staging for my only son. The day you moved me in was the loneliest day of my life. And I was the one who orchestrated every second of it. Your efficiency was breathtaking. You packed up my life into cardboard boxes, talking about auction houses and estate sales. You didn't ask about the story behind the chip vase your father gave me on our first anniversary. You just saw clutter when you left me in that room. With its sterile smell and generic art, you gave me a quick businesslike hug. You said you'd visit soon. And you did. You visited like a CEO visiting a branch office once a month, maybe for 15 minutes. And I felt every second of your absence. Don't think I was some emotionless mastermind. The pain was real. The loneliness was a physical ache. I'd sit by my window and watch the other residents with their families, and I'd cry for us, for the connection we'd lost. But I held onto the hope, the small fragile hope, that this lesson would take root during your visits. I'd try to plant seeds. Do you remember? I'd ask you questions when you were checking your phone. David, what do you think is the point of all this? All the work, the money, what's left when all that's gone? You'd pat my hand and say, don't worry about things like that, Mom, just focus on getting your rest. You thought I was becoming senile. I was trying to show you the abyss. I watched you from my window when you'd pull up in that shiny car. I saw the tension in your shoulders. I saw the way you'd pause before coming and steeling yourself for the chore of it. And I heard the reports from my manager, Martha. She'd tell me about your calls, your insistence on reviewing the itemized bill, your questions about cost-solving measures. You were treating my life, my final years, as a business expense. And the more you did it, the more hollow you looked. The money wasn't making you happy. It was just building a higher wall round you. The months turned into a year. The hope inside me started to flicker. I began to wonder if I had failed, if the lesson was too harsh, or if you were simply too far gone. I prepared myself for the possibility that you would never understand, that you would let me live out my days in this charade, and my final act of love would be seen as the ultimate betrayal. I made my peace with that, because trying and failing for my son was better than standing by and watching him destroy himself. Then last week you came for a visit. It was different. You'd just closed some big deal, but you seemed agitated, not triumphant. You talked about a competitor who had betrayed a longtime partner for a short-term gain. You were almost angry about it. And I saw my opening. It was time. I waited until your 15 minutes were almost up. You were already glancing at your watch. I asked Martha to bring us some tea in the private garden. It's a beautiful, quiet spot surrounded by roses. I chose it deliberately. This wasn't going to be an ambush in a sterile room. It was going to be a conversation among living things. We sat there, the silence stretching between us, filled only by the buzzing of bees. You fidgeted. I took a slow breath and began. My voice was different. The quaver was gone. The weakness fell away like a discarded coat. I said, David, we need to talk about this arrangement. You looked up, startled. I didn't sound like your mother anymore. I sounded like the woman who ran a multi-million-dollar household while raising a son and building a life after loss. I sounded like the woman who owned the chair you were sitting on. I laid it all out calmly, clearly, piece by piece. I told you about my plan. I told you I wasn't weak. I wasn't confused. I told you I owned Serenity Oaks. I watched the confusion on your face turn to disbelief, then to dawning horror, and finally to a shock so profound it seemed to steal the air from your lungs. You started to protest, to get angry. You lied to me. You manipulated me all this time, and I let you speak. I let the anger roll over. Me then I said yes, I did. I lied to show you a truth you refused to see. I let you abandon me so you could feel what it's like to abandon someone. I let you reduce me to a cost, so you could see the emptiness of a life measured only in profit and loss. This I said, gesturing to the beautiful, lonely garden. This is the world you were building for yourself, a comfortable, well-managed isolation. I just gave you a preview. Your anger collapsed. It just evaporated, leaving behind a raw, naked shame. You looked at your hands, you looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time in years, and you saw me not the liability, not the problem, your mother, the one who loved you enough to break your heart to save your soul. I leaned forward. The lesson is over, David. Now you have a choice. You can walk away from here. You can be angry. You can call your lawyers. You can go back to your life and never speak to me again. That is a path you can take, or you can stay. You can stay. And we can start again. We can try to build something real, not based on money or duty, but on the messy, difficult, beautiful work of being a family. The choice is yours. The power has always been yours. I was just trying to show you what that power really means. You didn't say anything for a long time. The tears just started to roll down your face, silent, helpless tears. You put your head in your hands, and you cried like the little boy who fell off his bike and skinned his knees. You cried for all the lost time, for the pain you'd caused, for the shock of seeing the depths of a mother's love, a love so strong it was willing to become the villain in your story, to give you a chance at being the hero of your own. You finally looked up, your eyes redrimmed. You whispered, I don't know how to fix this, and I reached out and took your hand, your strong, capable hand that was trembling. We start, I said, by just sitting here. We start by finishing our tea, so that's where we are. The ball is in your court, David. I don't know what you'll choose. You might walk out that gate, and this will all just become a bitter memory for you, but the anger is gone from your eyes. It's been replaced by a sorrow that has the potential to be fertile ground. I have peace now, a strange, painful peace, because I know I did everything a mother could do. I fought for my son's soul. With the only weapons I had, I tried to lead you back to the humanity you were so desperate to leave behind. Whatever you decide, I know I loved you enough to tell you the hardest truth, and sometimes that is the most wholesome comeback of all. The first few weeks after he moved me in here were the quietest of my life. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet that rings in your ears, the kind where you can hear your own heart beating and you realize just how alone you are in the world. I'd sit in that room with its beige walls and its single window looking out onto a parking lot, and I'd just wait. I didn't know what I was waiting for, a phone call that never came, a visit I know wouldn't happen. The silence felt like a punishment, like had finally managed to lock me away for good. But you can't live in that kind of silence forever. It starts to eat at you one afternoon. I just couldn't stand the four walls anymore. I ventured out into the common area. It was buzzing with a different kind of energy, not the loud, frantic energy of the world outside, but a slower, more deliberate hum. I saw Arthur first. He was sitting by the big window, a chessboard set up in front of him, just staring at the pieces. I asked him if he was waiting for an opponent. He looked up at me with these tired, kind eyes and said, I've been waiting for 20 years. So I sat down. I didn't know how to play, not really. He taught me. He had this incredible patience, explaining the moves, the strategy. I lost, of course. But for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about my son. I was thinking about knights and bishops and a checkmate. 3 moves away, then there was Gloria in the room next to mine. I'd hear her crying, sometimes soft and muffled through the wall. Her family was on the other side of the country. They sent flowers on her birthday, but they never visited. One day I just knocked on her door. I didn't have any grand words. I just asked if she wanted to come down to the craft room with me. We started making these ridiculous lopsided pottery bowls. We'd get clay everywhere, and we'd laugh, really laugh. It was a sound I'd almost forgotten, and the staff, they were run off their feet, kind most of them, but so stretched thin. I'd see the fatigue in their eyes during the evening medication rounds. I started small. I'd remember little things. I found out Sarah, one of the nurses, loved a specific kind of herbal tea that the facility didn't stock. The next time my lawyer came by for me to sign some papers, I asked him to pick some up. I gave her the box. You'd have thought I'd given her a winning lottery ticket. It was just tea, but it was the act of being seen, of being remembered. That's when I started using the authority. I had the authority my son didn't know about. It began with the food. The meals here were functional, nutritious, I suppose, but joyless. I had a quiet meeting with the head of the board that runs this place. I suggested, as the anonymous benefactor who held the majority stake, that perhaps we could allocate a little more to the food budget, hire a new chef who actually cared about flavor. I mentioned that morale for both residents and staff starts with a good meal. Within a month it was like we were living in a different place. The smell of fresh bread baking in the mornings, real roasted chicken instead of rubbery mystery meat. It seems like a small thing, but it changed everything. People started eating together. In the dining hall they talked, they lingered. I used my influence in other ways. We got a new bus for outings. I made sure the library was stocked with large print books and audiobooks. I funded a small program to bring in local music students to perform. It wasn't about throwing money at problems. It was about investing in dignity and joy. Slowly, without ever meaning to, I became a sort of hub. People would come to me with small problems. Eleanor, the light in my bathroom is flickering. Eleanor, I can't get the television to work. I'd listen, and I'd make a call. It was never a demand, it was always a suggestion from a concerned shareholder, and things got fixed. One evening I was sitting with Arthur and Gloria and a few others we'd collected along the way. We were like a little island in the common room. Sarah, the nurse, came over to check Arthur's blood pressure. She finished, and instead of rushing off, she lingered for a moment. She looked at me, and her expression was serious. Eleanor, she said, her voice low. We know. I didn't have to ask what she meant. I just looked at her. Gloria reached over and put her hand on mine. Arthur gave a slow, deliberate nod. Sarah went on. Mr. Jenkins, the administrator, he let it slip to a couple of us. He was so stressed about keeping you happy. We finally got it out of him. We know you're the reason. We have the new chef, the reason we got the raise last quarter. We know everything. I felt a cold spike of fear. If they knew how long until he found out. But Sarah shook her head. It's okay. Your secret is safe with us, with all of us. And she gestured around the room. I saw the day shift cleaner mopping the far corner give me a subtle thumbs up. I saw the receptionist at the front desk look over and smile. They knew, and they had chosen collectively to form a circle around me to be my protectors. They became my eyes and ears. On the rare occasions my son would show up for his 5-minute perfunctory visit, I'd know he was coming before he even reached the door. Sarah would text me, the Eagle has landed. It was our little code, and the staff would become suddenly noticeably busy around him. They'd treat him with a cold professional politeness that was its own kind of verdict they'd report. Back to me everything he said, every dismissive glance he gave my room. They saw him for what he was, and in their quiet solidarity I found a strength I didn't know I still possessed. This wasn't just a place I lived anymore, it was my home. And these people, they were my family, a real family. The idea for the party came from Gloria. We were having a particularly good day. Son was out, the chef had made her famous peach cobbler. She said, we should have a Founder's Day to celebrate whoever it was who saved this place from being such a dreary dump. She had no idea. I laughed, but the idea stuck, and I thought, why not? Let's have a party, let's celebrate. And I instructed my lawyer to ensure that my son, as my only listed next of kin, received a formal invitation to the Shady Oaks Founders Day celebration. It mentioned a special announcement regarding the anonymous benefactor. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist the chance to maybe catch a glimpse of the wealthy recluse he imagined was funding his mother's incarceration. It would appeal to his greed. The day of the party, the place was transformed. There were streamers and a small band. The dining hall was full of food that actually looked and smelled delicious. Everyone was dressed in their best. I wore a simple blue dress. I felt calm, surrounded by my friends. Arthur was fussing with his tie. Gloria was making sure everyone had a name tag. The staff were buzzing around, not with stress, but with a genuine excitement. We were all in on it together, this collective secret, this shared purpose. I saw him before he saw me. He came in through the main doors looking uncomfortable and out of place. He was scanning the room, not for me, but for someone who looked important. Someone who looked like a founder. He accepted a glass of punch from a server with a curt nod. He was so transparent. Then his eyes landed on me. There was a flicker of annoyance. What was I doing sitting at the front of the room? He started to make his way over, probably to tell me to move to the back, to not make a scene. That's when Mer Jenkins, the administrator, stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, residents and staff-honored guests, thank you for coming to our first annual Founders Day. There was a warm round of applause. My son stopped, forced to wait. Mr. Jenkins gave a little speech about the transformation of the home over the past year. He talked about the improved meals, the new activities, the renewed sense of community, and none of it, he said, would have been possible without the incredible generosity and vision of our benefactor, the person who believed in us, who invested not just money, but heart into making Shady Oaks a true home. My son was leaning forward, now eager. This was the moment. Mer Jenkins smiled. It is my great honor to finally reveal our founder. She wished to remain anonymous until today, but we simply can't celebrate without honoring her properly. The owner of the majority stake in this facility, the architect of its renewal, is one of our own, Eleanor. He turned and gestured right at me. The entire room erupted. It wasn't just polite applause, it was a roar. People were standing, cheering, clapping. Arthur was whistling. Gloria was crying happy tears. The staff were beaming. The look on my son's face, I'll carry it with me forever. It was a complete and total shattering. The confusion, the dawning horror, the sheer impotent rage. His mouth actually hung open. He looked from me to the cheering crowd, and back to me. The narrative had built the story of me as a helpless burden he had nobly disposed of, crumbled to dust right in front of him. But it wasn't over. That was just the beginning. As the applause died down, Sarah stepped forward. She took the microphone. She looked directly at my son. I've been a nurse here for 10 years, she said, her voice clear and strong. And I have never seen a resident bring more light to this place than Eleanor. She is the first person I go to when I need a clear head. She remembers every birthday. She has more compassion in her little finger than some people have in their whole bodies. Then Arthur stood up, shaky but determined. She taught me that it's never too late to learn. He said she's my best friend. One by one they stood. A physical therapist talked about how ID encouraged her during a difficult time. Gloria talked about how ID saved her from loneliness. A kitchen worker talked about how I always thanked him personally for a meal well made. Each testimony was a brick building a wall between my son and me, a wall of love and respect that his money and his neglect could never tear down. He wasn't just being contradicted, he was being erased. His version of reality was being overwritten by a truer, better one. He stood there completely isolated, in the middle of a crowd that adored me. The community I built was testifying against him. He finally couldn't take it. He didn't say a word. He just turned his face pale and tight, and he slunk out of the room. The door swung shut behind him, and the party didn't even hiccup. The music started again, and I was swept up in a wave of hugs and well wishes. Later, surrounded by my real family, Arthur, Gloria, Sarah, all of them. He felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. The love in that room was tangible. It was warm. It was real. It wasn't an obligation. It was a choice. They had chosen me and I had chosen them. My son left me with nothing but a quiet room and a broken heart, but from that nothing I built everything. A home, a purpose, a legacy. And I learned that a legacy isn't a bank account or a piece of property you leave behind. It's the lives you touch. It's the community you build piece by piece with kindness and courage. It's the family you find when the one you were born into fails you. That's what remains. That's what truly lasts.